This is Inside Broadway. I'm Susan Haskins. Here with me is my co-host, Michael Riedel of the New York Daily News.
The Tonys have been awarded. It's the end of the Broadway season, and here for a final look back are two of my favorite drama critics, Donald Lyons of the Wall Street Journal and my Daily News colleague, Howard Kissel. Welcome to Inside Broadway. All right, you both saw, excuse me, the Tony telecast this past Sunday. Your critical reaction to it, Donald?
To the telecast as telecast, I think it was a disaster. It was pre-cut, pre-jiggled, the music cutting people off. It had no spontaneity, no rhythm. It seemed jagged, cruel, ugly, brutal, and stupid. And I wish that they would let these telecasts run as long as they want. I'd rather hear endless pleas for the NEA from these people, or thanks to their, dogs and mothers, than this nonsense of cutting them off. Who cares whether the affiliates get 11 o'clock news in Denver? CBS is foolish to brutalize these awards like that.
Well, Donald, you and I live in an ivory tower, but in the world of television, time is money. And I think they lose money if it goes over. My feeling is that for the longest time, 10 or 15 years, nobody knows how to give speeches anymore. All they do is list the people they want to thank. At least Terrence McNally, I thought, did it wittily by thanking his mother, father, and brother for sitting outside in the car and listening to the SMU game on the car radio so that he could stay in the living room and listen to the Met broadcast. That at least was funny. But mostly they give a list of people that means absolutely nothing to the viewer. We know who some of these people are. It's meaningless. I think it's a kind of careerism.
Did you count the number of times they thank God? There seemed to be a lot of...
Sometimes we've gotten more, but nevertheless, they are witless, so as far as I'm concerned, they can be cut off because they're not saying anything interesting. But it's sad the few times when somebody did say something interesting.
I think the answer to endless acceptance speeches is not to cut them off, but to silhouette the good ones. I think there were some beautiful and graceful moments, particularly Jonathan Larson's sister.
Yes.
People who know how to do it gracefully, who've been doing it for a long time, like Terrence McNally, or who are instinctively eloquent, like Ms. Larson, are rare and will always be rare. I still think that cutting people off and drowning them out with music is
it's crude.
Is crude.
Yes, but also it was a disappointing show here. It was the 50th anniversary of the Tonys. Here was an opportunity to indulge in some nostalgia, which might have given the show some resonance. Instead, you had, I thought, one little segment, 20 seconds of Lee J. Cobb as Willie Loman.
Now, but how much
in a revival.
Yes, but how much of that was because Alexander Cohen
Probably
owns
a lot
those
of that.
tapes?
But there were other ways of going about it. There's plenty of material available. You don't only need to get it from Alex. He has the tapes from his shows, but there's plenty there's an abundance of material about the theater over the last 50 years that was usable.
Right, we should say that Alexander Cohen produced the Tonys from 1965 to 1985, I believe, and then was booted out primarily, I think, for attacking Frank Rich, who was then the drama critic during the Tony Award rehearsal. Anyway, the Schuberts kicked him out of the Tonys, and when Gary Smith, the executive producer of the Tony telecast, went to him this year and asked him if they could use some clips from past telecasts, Alexander Cohen said, "When Bernie and Jerry are dead," meaning Bernie Jacobs and Jerry Schoenfeld of the Schubert organization. So yeah, maybe you can't blame them if they weren't given the best stuff, but they probably could have had a little better clips from the old Ed Sullivan shows than the ones.
Yeah, I think Howard's point is good. There was no sense of the past. There was no whatever they had access to was not well used. Those clips were ludicrous and fleeting. And people were alive. I mean, Jose Ferrer won the first Tony for Serenity Pleasure. His son could have been there. They could have had old folks presenting the awards. The Oscars have tried to do that in the past.
Some cases, but it was, I'm afraid, a lifeless show.
Well, even with Nathan Lane, how do you weigh in on Nathan Lane? The funniest man in the world, they say. Was he any good last night on the telecast?
Well, he had some good material. I thought most of his Julie Andrews jokes were very funny.
The opening was wonderful. I thought the Forum cast coming from the theater into the Tony Theater at least looked great on the TV.
It did look great on TV. I'm not sure it was terribly meaningful to people who did not know New York very well, but it made a good picture. I think that CBS must have scripted a lot of Nathan Lane. What he did that was good was very much a clone of Billy Crystal's Oscar
Oh, it was written by Bruce
telecast.
Valanche, who's
Yeah.
Billy Crystal's writer,
Exactly.
and who wrote Whoopi Goldberg
Yeah.
stuff in the last
This
Oscar.
Just In, for
Yeah.
example, the
Oh,
phrase he
yes.
kept using was used
Same
by Billy
writer.
Crystal in the 1992 Oscars, very
But-
funnily, about Jack Palance, if you remember. And he
Billy,
came out as...
that's right. But the Billy Crystal, it seemed inspired. It seemed as if they were making it up as it was going along, responding to what
Yeah.
was happening in
It
the Oscars.
seemed.
This seemed a little. It
It
was
seemed.
not. I know that
Yeah.
they were busy writing
Yeah.
it. Bruce Valanche told me they were busy writing those jokes for Billy
Exactly.
Crystal. But I thought Nathan's had a little slight canned feel.
Oh,
to
exactly.
The jokes.
Yeah. No, I didn't think he brought it off. But that's interesting because I thought Billy Crystal. I'm glad.
I just want to make a little aside. Something Bruce Valanche told me. I was talking to him about writing this telecast, and he was complaining about the time constraints too. And he said, but one of the things he thought was good is that it was the first time that a comedian, Nathan Lane, was hosting the Tony Award show. I said, well, that's right. It's usually been a grand old lady of the theater.
Yeah.
And Bruce looked at me and said, well, it really still is.
How much do you suppose they pay?
I'm sure he'd agree.
How much do you suppose they pay Bruce Valanche?
I don't know, but I'd love to know how much you got paid by the joke. I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
probably a couple $100,000 or something like that, so maybe it's
joke,
like
right.
15,000 a joke. Any surprises in the awards? Anything that neither one of you expected? I guess we were all a little surprised by Audra McDonald's win for
I wasn't
Masterclass.
totally surprised by that. And I mean, I guess what made it surprising is she did win only a few years ago. And I thought Lois Smith would win because she's put in many years. She's a wonderful actress. But I think a lot of people were not that excited by Barry Child. The two awards that I found surprising, I really thought the theater community would not be as impressed by Nathan Lane's clowning as the patrons at the St. James Theater. Except there, too, he was being paid back for many years of good service. And to me, this is the least good thing he's done, so it seems a shame for this to be what gets him his Tony. But as we know, he has been slighted.
But that often happens with awards that they haven't won for past performances that are really great, so we feel we need to make it up to them. We give them the award for something that is less good.
The other one that I thought was a little surprising was George C. Wolfe, because I'm not sure that the direction of Danoy's Defunk was the best thing about it, but maybe it was a way that the Broadway community was acknowledging that he's in a position of power, and let's do
We did a
something.
poll, and George C. Wolfe won hands down.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Our Inside Broadway poll.
That's right.
He did win. 12
That's
votes.
very
George C. Wolfe is a star, and
Yeah.
people know his name. I think George C. Wolfe and Nathan.
But
Lane
I thought he
won
was a
for
bit of-
much of the same reason.
I thought he was a bit of a disaster, though, in
That
his...
their personalities.
I'm sorry, yeah. I thought he was a bit of a disaster in his acceptance speech. Did you?
Oh,
How did it come
was-
across on television? I saw the pre-tape version.
Now,
He
what was the pre-tape
Stream of conscious all over the place, making very, very little sense.
We got-
Charming at first because it looked like he was startled to win, but then he went on and got rather odd. I don't know how they cut
No,
it
they
'cause I
cut
didn't
it.
see the...
Just
cut
talk
it.
They
about
cut
his
it, but
mother,
he still seemed hysterical. He didn't seem. I mean, it was a very bizarre performance.
Yeah. Now, Broadway producers think the Tonys are so important because it's the big 2-hour national advertisement. How, though, do you think excerpts from Rent, for example, and Defunct Danois played to the mainstream audience, perhaps watching in Ohio, coming to New York, thinking of what they might see this summer?
I think that the Rent excerpt was actually quite intelligent. It wasn't an excerpt, it was a pastiche of highlights. I thought that was intelligently chosen. I liked it, and I think I would have been intrigued to see more by that. I was out making ice cream, doling out ice cream during Bringing in the Noise, Bringing the Funk. I can't speak to that.
That was a pastiche,
I
too.
thought that the King and I excerpt of the highlight of the Shall We Dance was a great mistake. You don't show the climax uninterrupted, but people know the King and I, so it didn't matter. I suppose they functioned well, the 3, 4 that I saw. That is what it is. It is a musical tease for the country, and I'm sure that's what CBS principally is interested in. Yes, I think Rent particularly did a fine job.
Howard, you saw
Well,
that?
Donald and I, of course, disagree about Rent. I don't know that the viewer in Ohio, but maybe I'm mischaracterizing the viewer in Ohio. I don't know that if he saw that, he would turn to his wife and say, "Darling, when we're in New York, that is what we must see," because it is a kind of gritty, abrasive thing. But that's my feeling about the whole show. I'm not sure that the people in Ohio, when they come to New York and take in a Broadway show, want to see something gritty and abrasive.
But the 18-year-old pampered teenager is going to look at that show and say,
yes.
Mom and Dad, you've got to let me see Rent.
I think
the Broadway
true.
consumers of tomorrow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but
Yes,
but it must be pointed out that Broadway is not surviving on 18-year-old pampered teenagers. Broadway is surviving on 75-year-old blue-haired ladies.
Yes, but in fact there is, I'm told, a high, what is the term for when alcoholics, recidivist rate among teenagers? A friend of mine who is a shrink says one of her patients has already seen it 4 times.
Rent.
Apparently,
very interesting.
One of her patients.
one of her patients, yes.
No wonder
The shrinks
no
ought to
wonder
go too.
she's in therapy. Now, you know, it must be pointed out that the rent people have said we don't compromise. The Broadway audience will have to come to us, and mainstream will have to come to us. They, of course, I know from sitting in a Tony Award production meeting, they cut out the lesbian kiss scene that was in
No,
the
they
little
did
section
not.
of Rent.
No, they did not.
No, they did not.
Embrace, anyway.
no.
Yes, but it was in,
There was a
it
kiss
weren't
originally,
clear
but
exactly what it was.
They kissed. They cut out the drag queen kissing the man.
The
but
drag
they
queen
had
kissing
the
the man,
lesbian
yes.
kiss. Absolutely.
They actually had the lesbian kiss.
Yes, they did.
Yeah, but I think it went by in such a way that if you didn't know that that's exactly what it
Exactly.
was.
You knew
might
exactly
not-
what it was.
Well, maybe because you had
This is
seen the
great.
show, but yeah, I know there was some
The
concern. on
drag
the
queens
part of-
were pointed out as lovers or something like that.
Right.
So-
There was some concern on the part of CBS people just how far they could go with aides
Really?
and pimps and prostitutes and junkies of Rent.
uh-huh.
But I think in the end they thought, well, we
As
could
opposed to the movies of the week that ABC, that
Well, isn't
CBS
that-
puts
isn't that
on
interesting? Yeah.
every Sunday. I
But I
killed
think-
my
I think
mother's
it was-
teacher, lover, whatever. Yeah.
For the cheerleading
The high
squad, I
moral
killed-
standards of
But I think
CBS should not be compromised by Rent.
Also bear in mind that after about 5 minutes, I don't know that there was a very general audience out there watching this program. I think it's mainly die-hard theater lovers who watch this program.
Well, the ratings weren't any better this year than they were last year, despite the hoopla surrounding the Tonys.
Yeah, and I suspect even if Miss Andrews had appeared, it wouldn't have made any difference. Nobody's going to watch a 2-hour show simply to catch a glimpse of Julie Andrews.
Now, Broadway producers are willing to do anything CBS tells them to do just to be on that spot. But do both of you think it might be better for the awards if they just say, let's go on to New York One or Arts and Entertainment or the History Channel, one of these smaller cable outlets, since Broadway seems to be history. And
Robin Bird
yeah,
show.
let them run on for 2.5 or 3 hours, and everybody has enough
Everyone
time.
nude, yeah.
Right. Enough time to speak. And
I do really. I think it's an insoluble problem to make nationally interesting a show celebrating a local and site-specific and transitional art form. If people, there isn't the Broadway glamour of yesteryear where people will tune on Ed Sullivan to see Mario Lanza and see Ezio Pinza, I'm sorry, and Mary Martin sing South Pacific. Nobody cares really, by and large, what's on Broadway. And there are so many local award shows, theater award shows. There's one in Washington, one in Chicago, one in Los Angeles, and probably many more. I think that's the way to go. I don't think that that a local, and we are just a province here, a local theatrical show can be made
But
nationally
isn't it sort of
interesting.
giving up on the culture if then we say, well, they're never going to get it anymore, theater's dead?
No, I'd like to see local television stations really celebrate, not just one, but
maybe
2 or
for
3
the
or 7.
people out in Des Moines who are watching it, you know, the 3 people who love theater, that it's worth.
Well, but they can pick it up on cable. But I'm afraid, I think the problem is not just that the theater doesn't have the glamour that it once did, but it doesn't reach out to the general audience as well as it did. I mean, it's trying, but it doesn't do it as well, and therefore the general audience doesn't care. Even the fact that Newsweek put Rent on the cover, that was really a remarkable thing, but I wonder exactly how it registered.
didn't sell that well, actually, on that cover of
Interesting.
Newsweek.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you then, the sort of take the long view. Why is it that Broadway no longer resonates with the culture? I'm sure there are many big reasons, but do you have a few of them off the top of your head? I mean, why is that? Broadway seems no longer to be important to the cultural life of America. Is that just Broadway, or is that
Broadway
the theater
doesn't
in
exist.
general?
Broadway, by and large, is a place for the national silhouetting of things that originate in other places.
But that too is a different thing.
Broadway's a supermarket now.
Right, but
that's
50
fine.
Yes, but 50 years ago, Broadway was where it originated.
Absolutely.
And then it sort of was taken out to the rest of the country. Part of it is simply the economics. You cannot create on Broadway. It is too expensive. And even Rent, you can bring it to Broadway because it only costs a mere $3.5 million. Whereas in the old days, you could create for much less money. But now, yes, things have to be tested elsewhere, and then Broadway is simply as you say, a supermarket. It's where they bring the produce rather than the farm
It's
where
the best product
is.
placement.
From downtown New York, from Australia, as in The King and I, from England, as in Ideal Husband, from Chicago, as in A Delicate Balance. Broadway is a kind of supermarket. But I don't find cause for despair in that, because a lot of good things are coming to Broadway from other places.
No.
But it's not a source of original creative energy anymore.
And again, I think a lot of it has to do with economics. It has also to do with the fact that the music changed. The music that I suspect Donald and I listen to bears very little relation to either Rent or Denoise Defunct. The music that America listens to is closer to that. 40 years ago, we all listened to the same music. We no longer do. But also, 40 years ago, you had writers who I think were more adult. They could write for the stage and make a living. Nowadays, very, very few people can make a living writing for the theater. So young writers who are smart or want to write to support themselves have to write for television and movies. They don't. I think we have very few adult writers. That was, I thought, what was nice about Delicate Balance, the revival of Delicate Balance, a reminder of what an adult play is.
Yes, there are adult playwrights around, but they don't write for Broadway. Sam Shepard. This is Sam Shepard's first Broadway production. I'm not an unqualified admirer of Sam Shepard, but the fact that it's taken 30 years to get a Broadway production is a scandal. David Mamet has rarely been produced on Broadway.
Actually, there I have to disagree. In recent years, but his first big play, American Buffalo, was done on Broadway with, in fact, a spectacular cast.
To be sure, but he's not a staple of Broadway production the way a playwright like him would have been 2 generations ago. Not even Arthur Miller, but in playwright like Richard Nash or William Inge, second-rate playwrights, routinely used to get produced on Broadway. The stars always, but and original plays, of course, originate anywhere in the country but Broadway. The culture changed not only in music, but the culture changed in serious plays too. The culture is not expressible nowadays in terms of the old-fashioned Broadway play. It's in a state of transition, I think. The actual dramaturgy, plays like Buried Child or Angels in America, which I'm not a fan of, are trying something new, or trying to put a new kind of reality on stage in a new kind of way. And the old era of the 3-act living room play is gone with the wind.
I was going to ask you, do you think, I think Rent is a part of this too. There is genuine excitement in Rent, something fresh, something new, but it seems to me that it lacks craftsmanship. It seems to me a lot of new shows, in fact, lack what you've been saying, writing 3 acts, beginning, middle, climax, end. Do you have any concerns about this? Is this a problem for the theater, or should it be free-form and we should be exploring all different kinds of things, including 8-hour productions of Angels in America when they don't seem to know how to end it?
Well, I think part of it is that we place such a stress on innovation and originality. And what I think the 60s were about in all of the arts was tearing down the old structures. We were going to reinvent the wheel. I don't think that the greatest writers in the theater are necessarily the innovators. Was Chekhov an innovator? No. It's just that Chekhov created great characters that still resonate a century later. Was Shakespeare a great innovator? No. He created great characters that resonate 4 centuries later. But because we're more interested in novel forms, novel structures, or anti-structures, we don't have character. And I think theater, this is very old-fashioned, I admit. I think character is at the heart of the theater. And because character is not really part of our culture, it's not part of our theater. And that's, I think, why we don't have what I would consider adult plays.
I disagree completely. I think Chekhov and Shakespeare were innovators, particularly Chekhov, who scandalized everybody, and they all walked out saying, this makes no sense, there's no plot here, what's going on, this is awful. They're mumbling up on stage. But innovation is not enough. Innovation has to mature and find forms and not stop being ragged and crazy. Look at Eugene O'Neill, I suppose by common consent America's greatest playwright. He spent the 1920s and the 1930s innovating with 8-hour plays about this, and plays with the id speaking and plays with apes and whatnot. And then eventually having been the great innovator, he sat down in his very ill 50s and wrote a play about his family, which is the greatest American play.
Right.
So innovation can lead to gradually, without innovation, no new life. Innovation itself is not enough. It's crazy and formless, and I mean, Rent is not a perfect masterpiece, no. But it's the new life, spring flowers breaking up through the ground.
People thought Hair would spawn a new trend, and in fact, it really didn't.
Hair spawned amateurism.
That's right, right.
And what made Hair a sensation? Hair was not a sensation when it was
Hair
done
spawned
downtown.
split ends.
Yes. It was not a sensation when it was done downtown at the Public Theater. When it moved uptown and had that 10 seconds of barely visible nudity, that's when it became a sensation.
Yes, like O Calcutta. It was,
Right. It was at that time, that was big stuff.
Yeah.
But yes, I think mainly what its lingering effect was the endorsement of amateurs.
Do you expect Rent to push the musical theater in a new direction? Do you think that Broadway producers are now looking for the next Jonathan Larson? Or does it say something about the Broadway theater that
I think so.
the biggest innovator, Jonathan Larson, is dead?
Huh.
No, that's an accident from which we can take no larger lesson. I think it's just a personal tragedy. But yes, because I think Rent is innovative in the ways that O Calcutta and Hair were not. They were simply meretricious displays of nudity or long hair or hippie garb on stage with lousy music.
There were a couple of good songs.
Good tunes, that's all I'm saying. All right, go on.
Yeah,
Not dinner.
well, there were a couple of songs that have lasted.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'll say that,
and also they were evocative of their time. The Age of Aquarius. It's still a kind of
Evocative and embarrassing, maybe. I mean,
well,
this is
but
the
it was
dawning of the...
ultimately, I know,
Yeah.
it was an embarrassing time in retrospect.
Yeah.
But see, my feeling about Rent is that it may not be that innovative because, at least in the theater, we've seen versions of these characters for a long time. We've seen drag queens, we've seen SM this, we've seen all these things. I didn't find them so interesting or so appealing. I certainly never identified with them, but again, it's this old-fashioned.
Yeah.
I found them cliche too. I mean, how many times have you seen the prostitute with a heart of gold?
You know,
Yes, well, who would go to musical comedy to find uncliched characters? The form is about cliches, but cliches that can put themselves across in melody. Yes, I think there was enough originality. I think the structure was the sense of loose form was exciting. They did some uncliched things after all with the story. I think it is moving. It's appealing. It skates away from a lot of dangers. It's not too self-righteous. It's not preachy. It goes for its own emotions. It lets its own emotions be there. The boy's desertion by his girlfriend who left him for another girl. It's fine. The central love affair.
I just thought it was pat that she left him for another girl. It was a kind of.
It would have been Pat had they not
egotism.
had they not done the Tango Marine, which makes it something witty. I think it has a sense of detachment and wit about its own
So the structure,
melodrama.
the loose form you talk about is exactly what led to the amateurism of Hair 30 years ago that Howard's
But
talking
Hair had
about.
no form. This,
Yeah.
I mean, this
Right.
has more. I will grant that this has much more dramatic form than Hair did. Hair was just a collection of numbers.
Yeah.
This, as I say, I find the characters and their situations less convincing than you do, and I find myself not engaged by most of the lyrics, which I do not find that witty. The one song that I genuinely like is the chorus about how many minutes there are in a year, and we have to value.
It's one thing I don't like.
I like that song too. I think it's a nice, tuneful pop song.
That probably would be the standard.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. Now, switching over to another musical that won a lot of Tonys, Bring In the Noise, Bring In the Funk. Do you think it can? Should it cross over to the mainstream? Should it get a white audience? Even though there seems to be, I detect in it, a lot of rather anti-white sentiment about that show.
But I suspect a large part of the audience is white. Because part of it is guilty liberals who love to be attacked. But I think no matter what, whether you're white or you're black, you can't not admire the dancing. It's a kind of a bitter pill to swallow. You have to sit and listen to the rather sophomoric text. But the dancing, I think, is genuinely exciting. And I would imagine that when you go to the theater, certainly the night that I saw it, but that's not a representative night, is it? Because there's the press there, there's a certain amount of paper. I don't know what the composition of the audience is. It would be a very interesting thing to see. But I think most of the black shows have found white audiences. Because I think
the problem with the black shows is they really haven't found black audiences.
I think very often that is the case.
Yeah. Yeah. But the funk to noise actually seems to be drawing
from both,
from both at this point.
Because again, the dancing is quite remarkable, and that's what people come to see. The content, I think, is less important.
Well, you complained about some smugness in the show.
Well, I think it's first of all, I think it's wonderful if blacks and whites in as large numbers as possible come together and enjoy the show. That has my total endorsement, and I'm glad that the show won the lighting, because it is really a show about lighting. Jules Fisher and Peggy Eisenhower very much deserve their award, and that is what the show is. Supremely, along with some moments of Saving Glover. I found the show repellent on the whole. I found it slender, although impressive as spectacle and as emotion. I found the whole agenda of the show, Reggie Gaines' book and George Wolfe's well-dissimulated anger, not so much an attack on whites, but an attack on blacks, particularly black culture. I think that Anne Duquesne, when she sings quasi-Billie Holiday, is putting down Billie Holiday, putting down the Harlem Renaissance. I think the treatment of Bojangles, we'll leave Shirley Temple aside, the treatment of Bojangles is disgusting. Bojangles was a great artist and should not be treated as a Tom. The notion that everybody is politically incorrect until Savian Glover strikes me as very immature and silly, and I blame Reggie Gaines and George Wolfe much more than Savian Glover, who is indeed a phenomenon. I mean, he's spoken of as the Charlie Parker of tap, and he is. He takes tap into a new, dark dimension that is quite thrilling to see. I'm not sure that it's the end. That's the last word on tap, but it is a wonderful word in the history of tap. But I think the show's sense of history is very inadequate and very immature, and shows an agenda. Less racial. I mean, of course, it is racial, but I just wish the show had been a little wiser and a little less harping on its own agenda.
Maybe look back on some of those great black artists with a little more love and compassion than putting them down and mocking them and making fun of them.
And appreciation. That's what I would say the show does most egregiously, is to put down the past.
But George C. Wolfe's stock and trade is anger. So that was,
and
I think,
anger
what he
wins the Tony Awards.
I guess it does, but also
his persona is the opposite of that.
And that's all the time we have. Donald Lyons from the Wall Street Journal, Howard Kissel from the Daily News. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Broadway.